Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the next speaker who will talk about really amazing stuff and developments in the world of CBD research, going beyond THC, maintaining cannabis plant diversity, and also aligning the medical cannabis industry with the herbal products industry. So, Dr. Sexton, everybody.
Thank you, Eugene, for inviting me to come today. And I just so appreciate Eugene. He does a fabulous job at organizing so many different things and representing this community. And I came here from Seattle, where we didn't even really have an ASA chapter. So it's been really exciting for me to see so many people getting involved and participating. I wanted to tell you a bit about me first, so you know who I am. You might have read the little bio that Eugene printed. I got interested in plant medicine when I was really young. I was about 16 years old. This was back in the 70s. Grew up with a granddad who was a medical doctor, so I don't even really know how I got connected to natural medicine, but believed really strongly in it from the time I was really young. I eventually studied to become a midwife. I was in West Texas, so I was delivering babies at home, and got certified as an herbalist to complement that. Raised all of my children using only herbs. They never had antibiotics or vaccinations, anything like that. And eventually wanted to continue pursuing education. I had gotten married young, had 5 children, decided to go back to school, and I wanted to have a medicinal herb garden, so I went to get a horticulture degree. And I grew a gigantic garden, and I grew some herb gardens. And then I realized that I really liked school and education and wanted to go ahead and get further education. So I ended up getting involved in research, for one thing, learning analytical chemistry. And then I went to school at Bastyr University in Seattle, who has now opened a campus here in San Diego, to train naturopathic doctors. So I got trained as a naturopathic doctor in Seattle. During that time I was working at a lab in the University of Washington that studied the cannabinoid system in neuroinflammation. And so I sort of just got steeped in cannabinoid pharmacology for 6 years of my life. 3 years after I graduated medical school, I did a postdoc in that lab. So 3 years I was full-time immersed in that. And then all the time I'm thinking back to the whole plant cannabis, because we're testing compounds, and what do they do with the receptors, and what do they do when you give them to animals, and I'm thinking, wow, there's all these people out here using a whole plant, and this is sort of going back to my roots now. Maybe I can take what I know and go back and apply it in a different way. So I opened an analytical lab in Seattle to offer analysis of cannabis. And the industry there just really wasn't ready for it. They didn't see it adding value to the product. Nobody wanted to pay. They talked about it and how great it was, but nobody actually wanted to pay for it. And being a doctor, it was important to me because I could also give recommendations in Washington. I can't do that here in California. But to really be able to guide patients, I think it's really important to know, especially for new patients, how many milligrams of THC are they getting? Because it's a really potent compound and it affects people in different ways. And even different medical conditions, the dose really matters. It has what we call a biphasic effect. So at a low dose, it's one thing, and at a high dose, it's another. And the same thing goes for cannabidiol or CBD. At a low dose, it's one thing, and at a high dose, it's another. So dose matters. If you take nothing else away today, dose really does matter in terms of what you might be specifically trying to treat with cannabis. Excuse me. The other reason that I'm here is that a few years ago I met Steph Shearer, who's the executive director of ASA. I went to a Patients Out of Time conference and met Steph. And she got really excited about the idea of cannabis. I mean, it had never occurred to her that cannabis is an herb. It's a natural medicine, and it fits really well into like what I do as a naturopathic doctor, using the whole botanical And so we started playing with this idea of how do we start like framing it, you know, as a botanical, it's a botanical medicine, you know, that's what it is. It's not a drug, it's not illicit, it's a botanical medicine. How do we do that? And so we started talking about these ideas of how do we align cannabis in that area. And so we sort of targeted 2 or 3 ways to do that. One is through generally the complementary alternative medicine movement. And then another was through the American Herbal Products Association. And the third one was the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia. So it's a lot of words and letters and AHPA and AHP and PAM and but that's sort of the big pictures that we started thinking on, you know, how do we get allies? I mean, that's how to really build a movement. You get allies, you know, and you gain momentum and you really make things happen. So I was the chair of the Scientific Advisory Board for ASA for a couple of years, and then Steph recently asked me to be on the National Board of Directors. So you have a board member here in San Diego to the National Board, and I want to represent you. I hope that you're all members of ASA, and that if you're not, that you will see why you should be, what ASA is doing for you. And see that it's valuable. It's not that expensive to be a member of ASA. And you get great emails and get kept up to date on what's going on. And Eugene's newsletters have the form at the bottom where you can just go on their website, the National ASA site. So I wanted to tell you first of all today about this project, and I brought these. They're on the back table, and this is just a little 2-sided page on what has happened since we decided to sort of align ourselves with these other botanical medicine, herbal products industry. Is that American Herbal Products Association, which is just north of us up in LA. They have been an organization since 1982. It was formed for herbal products, people in the herbal products industry, to develop general guidelines for working with different plants. So APA has 30 committees. So they have a whole committee just for aloe vera, There is now a whole committee just for cannabis. And so Steph set out and she went around and tried to get some cannabis industry members to join APA so that they could be a part of this cannabis committee. And it's not too late. If you want to be a part of this committee, you can still join APA and you can participate in the cannabis committee. So basically what they're doing is they're developing industry standards. And there's local organizations doing that. I've been told it was the same thing in Seattle. There were 3 or 4 different trade organizations all developing different regulations. And at that time, I kept telling them, join APA, join APA. This is the big picture. This is being done at the national level. Align yourselves here. We don't have to redo the work over and over at every level. And in fact, these guidelines are now being sent out to state regulators. So for instance, Washington State just passed Initiative 502. They are heavily drawing on APA guidelines. This is the first set of guidelines APA's come out with. This is Cannabis Distribution Operations. So there's 4 different parts of the Cannabis Committee at APA. So this is distributors. And these are the guidelines that the committee has come up with. And I'm pretty sure you can go online and you can download this paper for yourself. They're still going to be doing cultivating, manufacturing, and testing. So they're going to come out with 3 more sets of industry guidelines. And like I said, these have already been distributed to Connecticut, Colorado, DC, Washington, and some other states that have regulations in the works, because regulators don't know where to go for this. But if they can turn to a national organization and they don't have to invent it, that's what they want. So we've got this going in Washington State. We have the APA Cannabis Committee member will be in a meeting with the Washington State Liquor Control Board in a couple of weeks. So the other part of this is the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia. So have any of you ever heard of a monograph? An herbal monograph, a botanical monograph? A monograph is just like, it's a document. And it's got different chapters and sections. And every herb has its own document. And what's contained in that document is, first of all, the botany of the plant. You know, there's a lot of plants that if you went out to collect them in the wild, they might look like something else. And so with a lot of plants, not with cannabis, but a lot of plants you have to have some detailed description on how to differentiate them because one might be poisonous and another one not. So that kind of data is in there. And then it goes into microscopic analysis because there's a lot of instances where herbs are being imported into our country like a whole root. And often if you cut open the root and look at it under a microscope, you can differentiate and go, oh, this is not really the root that I paid for, that I thought I was getting. So that's what a monograph sort of details that information. The next pieces that it goes into are the chemical analysis. What are the important compounds to analyze for and that you can get standards for, and how do you do that analysis? What are the methods? And then the last part of the monograph is what we call the therapeutic compendium. So for instance, with the cannabis monograph, it's going to be the biggest monograph that the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia has ever produced. And part of that is because of the therapeutic compendium. There's so much data. Unfortunately, we don't have enough clinical data on whole plant medicine, cannabis, but we have a ton of clinical data on many, many clinical entities that cannabis can be effective for. So that's what the monograph will be. And so it's sort of AHP and AHPA kind of work together. It's different aspects of the industry, but they're two nice documents that, you know, will be here for your benefit. So this is what ASA National has been doing, is putting all of this work together and doing the really hard work of soliciting the funding to do this work. It's just incredible how much money it costs. Just to produce the monograph is going to cost like $100,000. And it's even mostly volunteer, but to produce the actual physical document. And it's going to be so big that Roy's hoping to mostly sell it as a digital version because it's going to be so costly to print such a big document. So in addition to these APA guidelines that I was talking about in the 4 different areas, what ASA is doing, so the next step is, for instance, again, the Washington State Liquor Control Board. They have to license testing facilities. So a guy from the control board got in touch with me, he got my name, and calls me, and he's just freaking out, What does this mean? How do you do this? Well, what do you have to do? Who's going to do it? Well, and, I said, calm down. This is why you have people who understand. You don't have to understand all of this because this is what you do. You get a group of advisors, and they tell you how to do it or do it for you. And so we have to figure out how do we license these testing facilities. And so what will have to happen is that somebody has to go into individual testing facilities and do a certification check, right? You have to have like an inspector go in and check off that they're doing everything right and the way they're supposed to do it. So ASA is starting a program to address this next need at the regulatory level, which is to provide certifications. And so some of you probably have been to the Patients First training. Have any of you been to Patients First? Nobody in this room? Really? Huh. Because I know Amanda Ryman came down here and did a Patients First training. I'm sure if Eugene was in the room, he was probably there. I think it might have been, I don't remember where it was done. It was before I was here. So the Patients First program was just sort of like a RAID training program initially. And that's still a part of Patients First, but this is now Patients First certification. And so what they're offering is to bring the awareness of all these standards to the industry, and then to, basically if you get certified, you get this little ASA seal that you're now a certified dispensary or you're a certified tester of cannabis. And so this is the kind of thing that governments will turn to. They're going to the governments aren't going to go around and inspect laboratories and inspect dispensaries. They would prefer not to do it. So they're going to probably put out requests for people to contract to do it. And so this is what ACE is putting together. So if you want to just pick up this, one-page flyer and read through, this is what else ASA is trying to do for you guys and for communities and state governments to just make the process easier for everyone, so everybody doesn't have to keep reinventing it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any questions?
The focus is towards cannabis in its psychoactive state, right? That's what they're testing. So they're not involved in testing cannabis in a raw state before it's psychoactive.
Well, it depends on what analytical method that they're using. I mean, what governments are really worried about is intoxication, addiction potential, driving, that kind of thing. And so, with those kind of blinders, all that really matters is THC at this point to them. So, yeah, they don't care about THC acid.
Well,
they need to be educated about how CBD changes THC, perhaps, but that's all really over their heads. They're very THC centric at this point, because that's the active ingredient that matters a lot. So in terms of the methodology, if you're using one platform which heats it, you don't have any acids left. Whereas if you do it in the raw state, you can actually measure acids if it's been heated. So far Washington isn't going to tell anybody which platform they have to use. It's more a matter of how efficient is their process. Can they reproduce their result? How are they tracking everything they do? How do they validate their methodology? So it's going to be, Washington's sort of setting the stage. No other state is this far along. And Washington has to have this in place by December.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Well, I choose raw cannabis. And I'd sure like to have some more information about what it is. I mean, I have ideas and theories, but I don't have any quantitative information to back it up. To me, the focus is on 1% of the potential of the plant. And I think that the benefit of the raw cannabis possibly exceeds, far exceeds the 1% we're focusing on in psychoactive.
Yeah.
It's like
And there's so minuscule amount of any kind of data on the acids at all, because THC is just such a potent compound that it's just sucked everybody in. It's what everybody's been on to.
Well, everybody knows about wheatgrass, but nobody knows about juicing cannabis.
Well, there are a few people that do. It tastes pretty nasty though, both of them. There was a question in the back.
Drink it, try it. Mix it with a little
Yeah, I've had shots of it. You had a question?
I was recently on a website, I don't remember which one it was, but it's one of the websites that is kind of promoting the notion of co-opting cannabis into big pharma. And they were just repeatedly saying, yes, you'd like to focus on the other 99% of the drug, but we can't test it in quantities because it's illegal.
Yeah.
So all we could do is sit around and think about what we would do, to make all of these grandiose plans if only we could legally test the stuff and devise protocols, because there's...
Yeah.
And I mean, if you're devising the protocols, then the alignment with the natural herb industry is going to be a lot easier.
Yeah, because, the same standards don't apply. With herbal products, we have like centuries of safety data, That's why they're on the market today, because the FDA acknowledged them as generally recognized as safe because of centuries and centuries of use by people, and we know whether they were safe or not. because people had used them over so much time, and cannabis falls into that category. Do you have a question?
Not a question, I just want to make a statement. My name is Damon, I'm from North County, I'm a commercial grower. I lived up north for a long time and lived in the woods and grew for a long time. And I just moved to San Diego like 5 years ago. Juicing is what everybody who's in the cannabis industry should be going towards. I know many, many, many people that only juice, and they have had complete 180 life-changing experiences. When I say that, it kind of vibrates and shakes the inside of me. I almost want to cry because the things that I have seen it do to people are miraculous. Don't think for 1 second that the pharmaceutical companies haven't been testing this for many, many years. Many, many, many years. The reason why I know that is true is because when you spend enough time around people that you probably shouldn't be spending time around, people start talking and things start coming out and information is shared in that manner. There's a gigantic warehouse in Carlsbad, California. A tobacco manufacturer owns the warehouse, and they are growing cannabis in a lot of different ways to figure out the best way to grow it. They have an overhead misting system, they have an aeroponic system, they have this system, blah, 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 blah. And what they're mainly focusing on in that warehouse isn't smoking it. It's how they can reproduce the effects without growing the plant. Because to them, they would have to spend a lot of money in lobbying to get everybody to fold and say, yeah, legalize it, and then let's pass all these pharmaceutical laws that say we are the ones that can use it and nobody else can. When they can just synthesize it, bypass all that stuff, and sell it to you in a less form, they can manipulate it and do certain things to it. And for a long time I was like, oh, I need to sell marijuana because I need to make money. Because I want to buy a big jacked up truck, or because I want to go on a vacation, or blah, 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 blah. And when you start to see the effects of juicing, when you start to see people getting healed, all that stuff disappeared. I don't care about money. I don't care about big jacked up trucks. You know what I care about? I care about helping people. That's what I care about. And juicing, cannabis, in the vegetative state, heals people's problems.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I think we probably have all had experiences, and we know many, many people that have had all kinds of amazing experiences in turning around of symptoms with cannabis, whether it was the acid forms or the decarboxylated forms. For neurological problems, typically, the faster you can get into the brain, the better. So that takes decarboxylation. But as we all know, raw foods are a great health benefit, and I think there's no doubt that cannabis has a role in that.
Melanie, I'm wondering if you would comment on the paradigm shift or difference in natural products with the whole spectrum of active compounds and difficult to quantify, quantitate, describe, and all, compared with traditional pharma development, which is single agent, and all regulatory is sort of geared towards that. So you've got two entities that don't quite know how to live with each other yet.
Well, that's why DSHEA was started, the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act, because they realized the FDA was created for single agent synthetics, because it all started with a drug called thalidomide. Probably most of you that are a little older know what thalidomide is, because it was being given to women to treat morning sickness, and it was approved in the UK, and it got approved in Canada, and then all of these babies got born with missing limbs.
Yep.
Like literally, hands coming out of a shoulder socket, and no legs. And there was a woman here in the US that they were getting ready to approve it for use here, and she kept saying, yeah, you know, I don't have a good feeling about this. And she was the one who diverted it from US use, or it would have happened in the US. And so out of that came what is now the FDA. There were earlier iterations of the FDA. So the FDA, and this was right during the chemical revolution, right? So like since the middle 1940s until now, I can't even give you a number how many compounds have been spewed into our environment that we're now all exposed to. Why do we have, you know, cancer everywhere? Why do we have childhood leukemias? Why do we have endocrine disruption and so much infertility and, you know, neurological disease? Why all of because
Obesity.
we have all of these chemicals that have come into our environment, and the FDA approves them without even first have to show that they're harmful. And it's often hard to show that they're harmful if they're in small quantity and they're bioaccumulating, and so it takes time to see how harmful they are. So that's what the FDA was for. And if you wanted to bring a single compound to market and claim that it could do such and so, then you took it, you know, through the stages of their clinical trials. And we know that does not fit for whole plant medicine. So what does fit, and to me it's just, it's a crime that it's not happening, is this enormous clinical trial that's taking place. And in this information age, that we are not collecting that data. Because that data would speak volumes about, if we had the data of what patients are using it for, and you could cross that data with, here is the phytochemical profile of the plants being used, we would know. And so it's ridiculous that this isn't even happening. So, you know, I have personally begged a number of people to give me money to do it. But nobody really wants to do it. But we all would like that information.
Well, do you know there's a movement now for opening clinical trials, alltrials.net. I was just reading about it yesterday, because there's a lot of, you know, in conventional drug development, clinical trial data is sealed, especially if it's negative. You don't have the results. You only have it if it's, positive responses or it gets published. So there's increasingly buy-in to getting all the data out, including the negative, because it's going to help.
Well, and often journals won't publish negative data. So, you know, it's not just the data gets filed away, it's that it will get written and it doesn't get published.
So as I was reading that, I'm thinking Cannabis trial aligning with this alltrials.net kind of approach. It's actually a really useful approach.
Well, it's not just the FDA, but it's also the NIDA that's not allowing us to do it. I mean, didn't the FDA give MAPS
Yeah, so FDA approved
they
MAPS,
approved
but it's
for the
NIDA
post-traumatic
has
stress.
the monopoly.
Yeah, and they said no. So my question is too, why aren't now we specifically have a lawsuit. Like we're going across, well, we've done this, we've done that. Now we have it.
Yeah.
We have the fact that the door was closed and that they absolutely said no and will not permit or allow testing. The FDA will. It was them that said no. So I think
The FDA
that's
said your
interesting.
protocol looks fine, it's all good, but, you know, unfortunately NIDA controls the one garden, supposedly one garden. I read the other day where there's apparently other gardens that are now actually growing to supply THC product for Marinol and the pharmaceutical varieties. So, you know, who knows? People, you know, I get asked all the time, and I mean, it's just so convoluted. I mean, who can explain it? So I don't even try to figure it out anymore. This is the way it is, and this is what we have to work with. So what can we do with what we have to work with? So the other thing I wanted to talk about briefly.
Can you answer that? So what can we do?
What can we do about NIDA?
Or what can we do with what we have to work with?
That's what I was just saying.
But like, what's
This
the-
is an enormous clinical trial that is happening. We have the electronic capability to capture the data. We have statistical tools to do infinite analysis on it. We could have the data. If we had tested it, I mean, it's sort of like doing it the way they're doing it, only on a different scale. You know, it's people committing to chemical analysis, that the product that goes out, we know, the terpenoid profile, we know the cannabinoid content, how potent is it, we know the person, what's their clinical entity, what's their symptom set, and you take those, you got one huge piece of, data network here, you've got another data network there, and you analyze them together, and it'll tell you all kinds of things. That's the way I see it happening, because we can't wait for NIDA. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the federal government? We don't know how long it's going to take to turn it around, or if it's ever going to turn around in the favor of the people who use the medicine. Is it only going to turn around in favor of pharmaceutical companies? It all remains to be seen. There's one thing for sure, they can't eradicate this plant from the hands of the people, So that's the good news. That's why I like to call it the people's medicine, because it is. The people have it, the people grow it, people use it, people titrate it, they dose it themselves, So it's the people's medicine, and they really, if it came down to it, we would all take seed out and just throw it everywhere, So let's see you eradicate it, How much is that going to cost? But I wanted to take just a little bit also to talk about plant biodiversity. Because you may or may not be aware, there's a number of different publications from different countries in the world, different states, California included, showing the trend over time for higher and higher levels of THC in the plant. My platform continues to be and will be, everybody's using too much THC. So, what do you do about that?
Can you tell me why you think that is?
Because part of it has to do with pharmacology. So if you take a receptor, which is a protein, right, and you take the ligand that binds to the receptor, there's basically two different ways that ligand affects, right? One is called an agonist, and one's called an antagonist. So at one dose, THC at the CB1 receptor is an agonist. That's typically a low dose of THC, but it's an agonist. So what happens at a low dose of THC and an agonist hitting that receptor? It's a negative feedback loop for neurotransmission. So anybody that knows anything about electricity and feedback loops, you got to have something to turn it off. So you got a neuron, and you got these neurotransmitters going across the synapse, and they go across and they get to the post-synapse, and you got to get a message back up here to say, got it, because you can't just have neurotransmitters flowing freely all the time. That's not the way a nerve works. So there has to be a negative feedback loop. So the cannabinoid receptor back here is the negative feedback loop. When our endogenous cannabinoids come back and bind, it says to this piece, got the message. And the neurotransmitter release stops. So that's what an agonist dose does. So if you hit that receptor with an antagonist dose, what's going to happen? Your negative feedback loop is gone, and you're not going to stop the neurotransmission. So that's why I say, and I have some experience with patients that use cannabis very heavily. They're using it at antagonistic doses. And the common sort of clinical picture that I saw with them was like rapid thinking. I mean, it's just like you would think the neurons firing all, they're thinking, talking. They can't stay with the thought. They can't carry through on conversations even. So, and that's, we all have different biochemistry, and it's probably different doses for everybody. But I consider this plant to be in a classification that we call an adaptogen. An adaptogen is considered to be a tonic that you can take over time. Well, to not change that endocannabinoid system, you can't be hitting it hard with THC every day, day in, day out. Because now you're altering your normal endocannabinoid system. The ideal should be to tone that system. We need it toned. I mean, it's a system of equilibrium for stress, basically. It fits all of the categories laboratories, if you go down to the chemical levels and the constituents associated with stress, it's been shown to reduce them in almost every case. But it's not at every dose. So that's, anytime I give a talk, I talk about dose and potency because I think it really does matter.
Why is it we're going in a different direction? Philosophically, if that's kind of what your feeling is, that treatment should be based on, different levels of THC. Over the last decade, we've been moving into a much heavier, high potency types of strains, so it seems counter to what you're saying then.
Well, because I don't think anybody's really thinking about the pharmacology. People are just thinking about getting stoneder and stoneder.
Yeah, it's
And
recreational.
as you use more and more, you develop tolerance, and so you need a higher dose to get the same level of stonerness, right? I mean, personally, a milligram of THC is fine for me. I know this because I've measured it, I've analyzed it, I've dosed myself in that manner. For most people, 1 to 2 milligrams, especially if they've never used, they're going to feel high, So, sorry, Eugene distracted me.
No, I have a question.
Oh, okay. So I lost my train of thought.
The knowledge base that you have isn't there for the users.
Right. So why does it keep going up? Because tolerance, just like with opiates, to get the same relief, you got to keep getting more and more and more. So it happens with THC. And then the other reason I think is that our society, there's so much stress, and now we've found this plant that seems to balance us out. And you know how things sort of like the pendulum swings too far,
Yeah, that's
it's like
America.
it's like okay, it's far enough. Let's come back to a really balance. How can we get balance? And part of how we can get balance is bringing CBD back into the plant. Do you guys know much about CBD? So it's really important. So CBD does not really directly act at either one of the cannabinoid receptors. It doesn't bind real potently to either CB1 or CB2. There's a couple of pieces of data out there showing that it somehow modulates or antagonizes THC at the CB1 receptor. We don't know how that happens yet. We have some clues on a couple of other receptors that may be acting at. It's a potent anti-inflammatory compound. Our federal government has patented it as a neuroprotectant. There is no drug on the market that has a claim of being a neuroprotectant. And we don't know yet whether CBD acid, we know in a binding experiment in a dish that it still binds potently, but we don't know if it still has the same actions as CBD. CBD is an anxiolytic. How many people are anxious in society? How many people get anxious from THC? There's actually human studies. It's called functional MRI. I don't know if you've ever heard of a functional MRI. So they gave a group of patients THC, and then they did functional MRI and looked at what areas of the brain were activated. They gave the patient CBD. They looked at what was activated, 2 different things. They gave THC and CBD together, and that too was different from the THC alone. And then there's been functional tests showing that it sort of reverses the short-term memory impairment, that it brings down the level of feeling stoned from THC, so it's not psychoactive. It seems to moderate the psychoactive effect. It's an anti-inflammatory, it's an anxiolytic, it's an anti-epileptic. It's been recently shown to be as effective as another antipsychotic drug in schizophrenic patients. Lots of questions. Sorry.
And then there's also difference with genetics, sativas versus indicas and all of those. Do you know what these studies are mostly on?
So, like I said in the beginning, few of them are whole plant studies, and to my knowledge, because I've been working on the monograph, so I've been reviewing a lot of clinical data, there's not a study yet that has used a high CBD whole plant material.
And
They
then-
don't, except for Sactivex.
But then synthetic doesn't have that natural, I don't know, explosion, like that natural magic that happens.
Well,
Yeah,
supposedly
that happens.
Sactivex is not synthetic. It's a whole plant extract. We don't really know if the terpenoids are there or not. They've never published that, or, you know, we don't know if they're also
Because
tuning
different genetics
the
mix meaning,
the
yes.
terpenoids. Yeah, so the terpenoids, that's a whole nother piece of the plant that make a huge difference in the effects. So you get one with, you know, that smells like a Christmas tree, and you've probably got high levels of alpha-pinene, and that acts like an Alzheimer's drug. Literally, on the enzyme, the way some of the anti-Alzheimer's drugs act. Yeah, and in terms of these designations of sativa, indica, there's so much crossbreeding now that it's, you know, until our genetics is more sophisticated, we're not going to be able to, I mean, we can all go around saying, oh yeah, this is an indica. And, you know, they do have phenotypic differences. You can see that, but you don't know what percentage. And then typically people think that, I hear that a lot that sativas are high THC and indicas are low. Do you guys have an opinion on that?
No opinion. Do you believe in genetic drift?
Well, the original data done by the University of Mississippi, and this was prior to THC was isolated, so they had the compound to do the analysis. You know, they were getting plant material from all over the world, and then, you know, and this was plant of origin. I mean, stuff that came from Afghanistan. That, you know, they pulled it out of the ground that had been growing there. So this was before anybody was crossbreeding it a lot, and their early analyses showed that the indicas were actually high THC varieties, which seems to be contrary to what I hear some people say today.
Who is doing these experiments? Since the federal government says you can't experiment with marijuana, who's conducting these experiments to get this data?
So a lot of them come from Europe, honestly.
Israel, Sweden, Czechoslovakia.
And then there's so many, there's a couple of drug substances that are whole plant, that are available in Europe. Well, Bedrocan, but it hasn't been used in a lot of studies, but Sativex, I mean, the whole section on multiple sclerosis that I did, it's almost all Sativex. You know, and then there's pain studies with Sativex.
That's a 50-50 group.
Yeah, it's pretty much a 1-to-1 ratio. It's 2.7 milligrams of THC to 2.5 milligrams of CBD. And so one spray for most people, you know, who were not users previously, there were usually maybe 2% that there was an adverse enough effect that they didn't want to do it again. But most people could tolerate, you know, a 2.7 with the CBD there. A THC without CBD there at 2.7 would be different. So anyway, that's my other plea. And in addition to, you know, let's bring the pendulum back now, because from ancient data on the plant, who I consider to be one of the leading experts in the world on this plant is Ethan Russo, and he's published some articles on the history of the plant. He published one recently on the terpenoids. He's written books. He's the medical director for GW Pharmaceuticals. You know, and he's helping on the monograph. And when we look at all the, you know, the history that we're bringing in, it's really obvious when you read like some ancient Egyptian text, and it was used as a topical, but it was an anti-inflammatory effect. So there just had to be CBD, and I mean, there's different references like that where you just know that it was an anti-inflammatory. So there had to have been CBD in the plant, not just THC. So, you know, our consensus is that it didn't used to be so drug type, fiber type, you know, but in terms of biodiversity, it was all across the board. But we've now shifted it way over here. So if you think about it from a plant biodiversity perspective, if you're a grower, just thinking about bringing that back into balance. And so once you have the genetics for this enzyme to make CBD acid, you're going to automatically bring the THC acid synthase level down. So you're not going to still get an 18% THC with, you know, a 5% CBD. The plant can't really even produce that much. So you're going to get more 1-to-1 ratios. Eugene has a question.
Yeah, I was wondering regarding THC, you mentioned earlier that currently the levels are so high, so much higher than they were in the past. I wonder, is it a bad thing? And if so, specifically, why? And what is it that THC negatively impacts the body? I know there's a whole sort of side of it medicine being an enjoyable thing. So in addition to providing more therapeutic benefits, it also is something you can enjoy rather than it be a disgusting process or painful when you go through and healing yourself. So I'm curious, is it that THC is bad for you, that's why we don't want it that high, or is it that we just want the CBD levels a lot higher as well?
I think maybe you were out of the room when I was talking about it, but so I was talking about the pharmacology and the effect of an agonist versus an antagonist, and how at low dose THC and CBD are agonists, and at high dose they're antagonists. And so if you just think of it, so most people are familiar with opiates, right? And, I mean, if you haven't been strung out on opiates, you probably know somebody who has, right? From dental surgery or